Hamish de Bretton-Gordon is a retired British Army colonel and former commander of NATO's and UK's chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear reaction troops. Welcome to our program, Colonel Hamish.
Thank you very much for having me.
I would like to start with the latest news from The Economist. According to The Economist's predictions, the war in Ukraine will end this year in 2025. Meanwhile, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin said that he would be ready for a compromise over Ukraine. Do you believe that the war in Ukraine could be stopped this year by Donald Trump and his team? Can Trump really force Putin to agree with a ceasefire?
Well, I think we all very much hope that that is the case. And it's very interesting hearing some of the comments coming out of the Kremlin from Putin and some of those close to him. It is clear that the Russian economy is in free fall, is suffering very, very badly. It is clear that the Russian population are now getting really fed up with this war, seeing so many of their young men being killed on the front lines. And it's clear that Putin has suffered, a couple of major setbacks in the last 4 weeks. His forces have been defeated in Syria, where he invested so much time and effort. He's lost his one warm water port, which was Tartus in the Mediterranean. And he has had to withdraw his troops, or what he could, from Syria. So that was a very major blow. We then saw that the Ukrainian Secret Service eliminated his right-hand general, Kirkov, which was a severe blow to him as well. And when Putin starts talking about compromises, one then realizes that actually these things are beginning to affect him and the Kremlin themselves directly. This is not sort of language we've heard from the Kremlin or Putin for the last, coming up to 3 years. So I think, with President Trump due in the White House in a few weeks' time, and as you say, the Economist predicting this won't go on for another year, I think Putin cannot go on for another year. Whatever he says, the Russian economy, Russian people just cannot maintain it. And with President Trump coming in, again, the language coming out of Washington and coming out of, the future President Trump is very interesting. It is very different to what we heard sort of when Trump was elected back in November last year. I think Putin and the Russians sort of thought that Trump would side with them, but that appears absolutely not to be the case. And I think Trump is giving Putin an ultimatum. Basically, you have a ceasefire on President Trump and President Zelensky's grounds, or America will go all in with Ukraine and basically defeat the Russian army. So, yeah, I absolutely hope this war will end as soon as possible. And this year, 2025, all the signals are against Putin. And he seems, by what he's saying in public at the moment, to realize that that's the case. And I think Putin is now looking for a way out, where perhaps he can still continue as president of Russia. One finds that very difficult to understand with the damage that he's done to Russia, its economy, its army, and its people. But that conciliatory talk. So I think, we are all positive. But of course, the ceasefire and the peace deal must be on terms that the Ukraine people can agree with. That is the key.
Do you feel that Vladimir Putin has no choice but to try to go out, try to find this way out of the war against Ukraine by agreeing with Trump's proposal on Ukraine? Do you feel that if Vladimir Putin declines Trump's proposal on Ukraine, then he can lose his grip on power?
I think things are moving in that direction, certainly. it is very clear that Putin now realizes he's in a predicament. He's in a difficult position. And he seems to be now looking more at his own personal survival than perhaps, what is happening in Ukraine to his army. And he knows that, if he is defeated in Ukraine, then that's the end of him. We know what happens in Russia with failed dictators. They very quickly get taken out and removed. And I think Putin is now really looking to see how he can survive himself. And, one is getting the feeling that he realizes that, the cards are all in President Trump's hands. President Trump could lead to the complete demise of Putin or could give him a way out. But Putin knows that his only way out is some sort of orderly withdrawal from Ukraine, rather than complete defeat. If the Russian army is completely defeated in Ukraine, Putin is finished. And that is in the gift of President Trump, I expect. So, I think Trump does hold the key here. And, for President Trump, not that I know him personally, I only sort of read about him and listen to him. He seems to be the sort of person who revels on success and tries to avoid failure as at all possible. If he can create a ceasefire in Ukraine early this year, at the very beginning of his premiership, I'm sure we'll hear him shouting about it all around the world. For him, that will be his greatest success. So, at the moment, the tide, everything is moving in Ukraine's direction, I think, and against Russia. And let's hope that Trump is as good as his word when he becomes president at the end of this month.
It seems also that Vladimir Putin has faced numerous setbacks during the latest months. High casualties rate in Ukraine as a failure to achieve strategic objectives in the war against Ukraine, the withdrawal from Syria, and also they even have managed to shoot down Azerbaijani Airlines, a civilian plane. Moreover, Russian General Kirillov has been eliminated. What is your assessment of the every setback Russia has faced during the year of 2024?
Well, I think you've captured it very well there, what has happened in the last few months. Setback after setback, and failure becomes a habit. And Putin seems to be failing, virtually everywhere we turn. As you say, even last week, the Russians seem to have shot down a civilian airliner, killing, a lot of people. That in itself would be horrific, and would certainly in the Western world would cause the president or prime minister of that country to have to resign. But when you put it on the back of everything else that's going on, the huge casualty rate, the fact that Russia can only fill up its army these days with North Korean mercenaries, that no doubt is costing Putin an awful lot. So it's an expression that we use, death by 1,000 cuts. And Putin might not have 1,000 cuts, but he's got several hundred. And these are really, really hurting him and really hurting Russia. And the momentum is so important in warfare and in these sort of geostrategic politics. The momentum is really turning against him, which is why why I think we're hearing his conciliatory tones, suggesting that there is a way out rather than just continue to fight. But he also realizes that way out is to allow his own survival is going to be the Russian army out of Ukraine. I can't see, anything less than that. So, things are going badly for Russia. Once things start going badly, it's very difficult to turn them around. And at the moment, one can't see a prospect of that. And maybe Putin is wishing for President Trump to come into power as quickly as possible so that he can stop the war and potentially save his own skin.
Also, let's cover another Russia's setback, the Kursk Oblast, the Kursk region. Russia and Ukraine has successfully destroyed Russia's 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, according to Forbes. Moreover, today, Ukraine, right now, several minutes before our conversation or several hours before our meeting today, Ukraine has successfully struck the command post of this brigade in the Kursk region. We have seen new footage from the armed forces of Ukraine. How can you assess current situation in the Kursk region and unsustainable losses of Russian army? Because according to Forbes, the Russian brigade, 810th Brigade, has been redeployed out of the battle because of the high rate of casualties there.
I think it's a really important and significant development. We discussed before Christmas that Kursk would really hold the key to what happens in future. You know, Kursk is such an important piece of Russia to Russian people. You know, it's where the Great Battle of Kursk was fought in the summer of 1943, which eventually started the demise of the Nazis. But, you know, tens, hundreds of thousands of Russians were killed there. Now, to lose that territory last year to the, amazingly effective Ukraine military incursion was a devastating blow. And I think, you know, part of the reason that Putin is now backtracking and looking for a way out is that he was gambling on retaking Kursk. He said it. He said he'd retake Kursk by Christmas. And it's clear he obviously hasn't done that. And as we've seen in the last few days, you know, his main brigade there has been absolutely decimated by Ukrainian forces. And, I can quite see if the brigade has been redeployed, it's going to leave a vacuum, and potentially Ukraine military could take more of Kursk. So his failure to retake it is yet another, I think, severe cut to Putin's position and power. And if he can't retake Kursk by the time President Trump comes into power, again, he is going to be severely on the back foot. And, I think we're all delighted that the armed forces of Ukraine have realized quite how important Kursk is and have significantly sort of reinforced that area and had a lot of military success in the last few days and weeks. So as we discussed many times, Kursk is the key here. And at the moment, the Ukraine military is very much on the front foot in Kursk. And there is no sign that that's likely to change anytime soon.
North Korean army has suffered more than 3,000 casualties in the Kursk region. We have also seen some interesting videos with poor actions and poor performance of the North Korean soldiers there. How can you assess the effectiveness of the North Korean deployment and their military operation in the Kursk region, as we now have seen the main results of their operations there and high number of casualties?
Well, I think the North Korean performance and the North Korean involvement says an awful lot about Russia at the moment. First of all, I think it's virtually criminal that these soldiers who don't speak Russian, and I expect very few Russians speak North Korean, they've been thrown into, an area that they don't know, commanded by people who speak a language they don't speak, in a climate that they, entirely unsuited to, the devastating cold winter, of the east of Ukraine, and Kursk is completely alien to them. And the casualty rates, as we've seen, it's even higher than what the Russians are leaving. I mean, these people really are being marched to their death by their Russian masters. It is a crime. They are, in effect, mercenaries, but no doubt these poor soldiers, are not being paid the sort of bounties that you would expect mercenaries to be paid. So, yeah, I think it's almost a crime against humanity to put these poor North Koreans. But what it shows even more is how desperate Putin is for soldiers. He can't generate any more Russians to go and fight, so he's having to buy, in effect, soldiers from North Korea. It says an awful lot about the North Korean dictator, Kim Jong-un, as well. So, I think this again, if one look at the positive from Ukraine's perspective, shows that the sort of Russian edifice is crumbling. And that's why the West and the US must keep the pressure on Russia, keep supporting Ukraine to make sure that Ukraine gets a peace that it really deserves, which now seems almost at touching distance.
Ben Hodges is a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General. He was former commander of the U.S. Army Europe. Welcome to our program, General Hodges.
Thank you very much for the privilege.
I would like to begin our discussions with Russia and Vladimir Putin. Russian dictator Putin has faced numerous setbacks in the recent months: withdrawal from Syria, a failure to liberate the Kursk region, and unsustainable casualties for really incremental gains on the ground in Ukraine. In what condition and in what situation Russia enters the year of 2025?
I think that Russia today is in a much weaker position than it was 1 year ago. You've mentioned, of course, the collapse of the Assad regime and Russia's inability to save their ally Assad. Looking at the report yesterday of the last Russian submarine in the Mediterranean having to leave because they can no longer use their Navy base in Syria. I mean, these are powerful indicators of trouble. I can also vividly remember February last year when I was at the Munich Security Conference, and the news of the collapse of or the capture of Avdiivka was, everybody there in Munich was distraught almost. And since then, in 11 months, Russia has only been able to move forward about 60 kilometers. They still have not captured Pokrovsk, at the loss of hundreds of thousands of casualties and thousands of vehicles. And their inability to reduce the Ukrainian bridgehead inside the Kursk region, Oblast, and the fact that Ukraine launched a new attack in that same area this weekend, all of these point to serious problems on the Russian side.
As you just mentioned, Ukraine has launched another counteroffensive inside the Kursk region and already has made tactical advances, according to the U.S. Institute for Study for War. Do you see this as another Russia setback, as Ukrainian troops are on the offensive again, despite Vladimir Putin's orders to liberate and repel this attack of the Ukrainian armed forces?
Well, of course, it's very early days in this latest phase of the Kursk counteroffensive, and so the reporting is always going to be somewhat incomplete, and we're not entitled to know everything that's going on. But three things come to mind to me immediately. Number one, once again, Ukrainian armed forces have managed to launch a surprise attack in an area where you would think that Russia would be able to see and know everything that was going on because of the number of drones that they have, the fact that they have been fighting around the edges of the Kursk bridgehead for almost 7 months now, and that they were surprised by another attack. That tells me that Ukrainian competence on maintaining security and secrecy is very high level, and also Russia's ability to see what's going on in front of them is not what you would expect at this point in the war. The second takeaway for me is that this shows a real understanding of the operational level of warfare by the Ukrainian General Staff. By launching this attack, it continues to present dilemmas for the Russian General Staff. Do they have to pull resources now from another part of the war to address Kursk? Because obviously what they've done so far is not enough. And I've heard that Russian mill bloggers are complaining that Russia does not have adequate reserves in the region. This to me is astounding. The third takeaway, of course, is this complicates things for the Russian side if they are thinking about some sort of negotiated outcome where they get to keep what they have, because obviously Ukraine controls a significant part of the Kursk Oblast. So that's a real problem for the Kremlin as well. I am impressed with what Ukraine is accomplishing in the Kursk direction.
Also, 3,800 North Korean troops have already been killed or wounded, according to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Do you see this deployment of the North Korean troops to Russia and Ukraine? Don't you think that this decision has turned out to become a big disaster for Vladimir Putin?
Well, it appears to me from talking to Ukrainian officers that the North Korean troops are employed by the Russians just as additional fodder, cannon fodder, that they are not bringing some special capabilities or a unique approach to anything. They are just fed into the fight. I think they're probably, of the 12,000 total North Korean troops, at least that's the unclassified reporting, they're divided into 4 brigades that are being integrated into Russian forces. So it's just more bodies being used in the same way that the Russians are. So I don't know that has done a lot to help Russia, except maybe to give them an excuse not to draft soldiers from Moscow or the St. Petersburg area. On the North Korean side, I don't know. I wonder what was the payment to North Korea for these 12,000 soldiers? Was it money? Was it oil and gas? Was it some sort of technology? I don't imagine that Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, cares too much about losing thousands of his soldiers. I wonder what he's getting in return for this and if he will continue to do this.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is confident that US President-elect Donald Trump has enough leverage over Vladimir Putin to force Russia to stop the war and agree with a ceasefire proposal. Can you imagine a scenario in which Vladimir Putin agrees with Trump's proposal on a ceasefire?
I think first and foremost, of course, it depends on President Zelensky. That's the most important voice in any talk about starting negotiations or in the actual conduct of any negotiations. President Zelensky has to be the one. Ukraine will not do what the U.S. says or what Russia says, obviously. But to the point of your question, I think incoming U.S. President Trump has a lot more leverage over Putin now than he did 8 years ago. 8 years ago, Putin was in a very strong position politically, economically. He had the advantages, whereas Donald Trump was a brand new president, was not prepared for the office, and we were not in a good place. Now, 8 years later, Donald Trump shows up with a lot of experience. He inherits a very strong U.S. economy. He has the benefit of 31 allies in NATO, along with the U.S., most of whom recognize the importance of stopping Russia. So he won't have to convince them to do something. And I think President Trump, hopefully, I don't know this, but hopefully he will use that leverage to force Russia to leave or to accept some sort of an outcome that is favorable to Ukraine. I mean, he can continue to allow everything that the Biden administration was doing, plus. I mean, the system is already in place. All he has to do is say, give more, faster. Or he could use economic tools more effectively than the Biden administration did. Stop Russia from exporting oil and gas, for example, through the so-called shadow fleet out of the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. Cut that off. And Russia is no longer able to sell oil and gas to China and India. That would, I think, have a significant impact. These are the kind of things that Trump could do.
But do you believe that it would be enough to stop Vladimir Putin?
I think Putin will keep going until he realizes he can't win. I think right now he still thinks that at some point the Trump administration will accept something less than the outcome that I think you and I both want and that Ukrainians want. Until he sees differently, I think he'll continue because casualties don't mean anything. If the economy of Russia, however, continues to go south, then by the middle or towards the end of this year, I think Putin will start to feel real pressure from inside Russia that he has not had to worry about so far. So I think that's the only thing that will make Putin stop is when he realizes he cannot win.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that the war could be stopped if Ukraine would be provided with bold security guarantees from the United States. What kind of security guarantees Trump's administration could provide Ukraine with, from your perspective?
Well, of course, the only true security guarantee is NATO membership. And unfortunately, the Trump administration has not indicated that they are in favor of this. There are many or several European countries that also are not yet in favor of it. But if the U.S. were to say, no, this is important, we will clear the way, we will help, we will do all these things, then I think most European countries could be persuaded. So NATO membership is the key. Now, the fact that the Mr. Trump has not shown any support for this so far, is not a good thing. But because I don't believe he is driven by ideological or moral things, but more about power and U.S. interests, I think he could change his mind quickly if he were to see that it's in the best interest of the United States that Ukraine becomes a member of NATO. That's why I still hold out some hope that this could happen. Now, short of NATO membership, of course, having U.S. troops and other European troops, Canadian troops inside of Ukraine with real capability, that would be helpful. But they would have to have a real mission. They would have to have all the necessary things like air and missile defense, counter-drone capabilities. What would they be there for? I think this is the kind of thing that would help, but it would not have the same security guarantee that, say, obviously NATO membership would have.
And what is your assessment of the Kelloggs plan on freezing the front lines and also deploying European peacekeeping forces without American U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, of course, General Kellogg's, a couple of things he said give me hope. Number one, he said publicly, Russia cannot be trusted. That's a very important starting point for any negotiation with Russia, is to acknowledge that they cannot be trusted. The second thing is he has emphasized the importance of Ukrainian sovereignty. That's important. But I think that if you start talking about any negotiation that allows Russia to keep what it has, especially Crimea, I think is a bad deal. As long as Russia controls Crimea, they will be able to block access into Azov Sea. They will be able to threaten the Odessa, Kherson, and Mykolaiv ports, and they will always be ready to launch the next attack that will surely be coming in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. So I have a problem with us putting pressure on Ukraine to give up territory for the sake of peace, when at the same time, you acknowledge that Russia cannot be trusted. On the subject of a peacekeeping force, a good example of how to do it is the NATO IFOR, the implementation force that went into Bosnia in 1995. First of all, they had a real mandate. Second of all, they had a real agreement, the Dayton Peace Accord, to be implemented. And then NATO went in with a significant force that had air, land, and sea capabilities. They had all the things that were needed to be a credible deterrent force. It had a very clear chain of command, and it had rules of engagement that would allow soldiers to defend themselves, to use their weapons where appropriate. So any peacekeeping force has to have all these things. I mean, it has to have counter-drone capability, has to have air and missile defense capability, and it has to be trained and ready to defend itself. Otherwise, it will not be a deterrent, because for sure the Russians on day one will begin to test it, just like they did after the ceasefires of the Minsk agreement, which were obviously a total failure.
Do you believe that Russia cannot sustain this war for a long haul if Trump's administration continue to put pressure on Russia, if sanctions are not lifted, and if Ukrainian troops continue to move deep inside the Russian territory, also if Trump provides Ukraine with security guarantees and also with security assistance?
I don't know. I would be very skeptical that Russia could keep doing what they're doing today through to the end of 2025. They will find the bodies somewhere, but you can't produce tanks and artillery and replace equipment at the rate that you're losing it, or they can't. And if the U.S. were to and our European allies, by the way, Europe, the good news I'm hearing from European countries is that more and more understand the importance of helping Ukraine. And so I would anticipate that we may start seeing an increase in what some European countries are providing if there's a sense of urgency. But I think many of them also are kind of waiting to see what is the U.S. going to do. So, I mean, only President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government can decide whether or not is it better to keep going or is it better to move towards some kind of negotiated settlement. But if I'm an advisor to the president of Ukraine and I see what I see now, I'm thinking, why would you stop? Are things going to get better? Is security for Ukraine going to get better? Is the future for Ukraine going to improve if you accept a negotiated outcome with Russia in the next few months, unless there are significant security guarantees, real security guarantees of some sort, and a promise of real investment in Ukraine's reconstruction. And I don't think a lot of money is going to come to Ukraine if the big money, I'm talking about big money investors, believe that the war will start again in 2, 3, or 4 years.